Hello, my name is Aurelia, and on the day I married the man I love, my sister poured wine down the front of my dress right as he walked into the room. People gasped. She smiled. And my parents, they told me not to make it about myself. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing this wasn't new. It was rehearsed. The cake, the mic, the photo slideshow that erased me from my own childhood. What do you do when your entire family quietly decides you're expendable? When love looks like sabotage wrapped in a hug, would you walk away, or would you finally speak? The stained glass windows cast a soft, buttery light across the aisle. It was late afternoon, but Savannah's humidity hadn't let up. Sweat clung behind my knees beneath the layers of satin and lace. I shifted my heels slightly, trying to ease the ache forming at the base of my spine. I should have felt magic. I should have felt something close to joy. But the first thing that pulled me out of that dream was a cheap name tag. Taped crookedly on the wooden seating chart near the entrance was a card labeled in cursive. Bridal Assistant, Aurelia Delacroix. Not bride, not even maid of honor, just assistant. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone on the planning team mixed up the signage, but the wedding planner, Heather, was meticulous. Nothing she did was off. I stepped closer, staring at the ink as if it might rearrange itself. Then I heard her voice behind me, light and sing-songy. "Oh, shoot," Seraphine said. "That must have been left over from last week's event. Weird, right?" She sipped from a wine glass, her lipstick perfectly smudged at the rim. The lie was too clean, too fast. I didn't respond. I took a breath instead and smoothed the bodice of my dress. Today was about me, about Russell and me. I had promised myself I wouldn't let her do what she always did, take the moment and twist it into hers. The guests began to arrive in waves. I could hear the murmur of voices echoing through the chapel's foyer, the rustle of dresses, and the polite clink of heels against polished wood floors. My parents entered shortly after. My mother smiled, kissed Seraphine on the cheek, and walked right past me without noticing, or pretending not to notice, the name tag. My father gave a tight nod and made a beeline to the front pew. Neither of them said a word about the label. They never did. They hadn't said much when Seraphine ruined my prom dress with bleach by accident, or when she borrowed my car in college and returned it with a cracked windshield. They called it sibling mischief. I was too serious, always making a scene. So I did what I was trained to do. I swallowed it. Again. The string quartet began tuning up at the far end of the chapel. The air shifted, more excitement, more anticipation. Someone called my name. I straightened my back, reminding myself to breathe. Russell was minutes from walking in. My dress had been altered to perfection. My hair held in place with a dozen hidden pins. Everything had been planned down to the second. But as I turned the corner toward the main entrance of the chapel, Seraphine intercepted me. Her smile was too wide, her arm too casual. She tilted her wine glass just slightly, pretending to adjust a loose strand of my hair. And then it happened. A splash, warm, thick, red, spread across my chest like a wound. The wine cascaded down my ivory bodice, soaking the lace and pooling into the folds of my skirt. Gasps rippled through the guests nearby. I froze. For one suspended breath, the entire room held still. My ears buzzed, my vision narrowed. Seraphine gasped, theatrically. "Oh no! Oh my God, I'm such a klutz!" She fumbled with a napkin as if she were going to help. But her eyes didn't match the horror in her voice. They sparkled with a gleam I knew too well. The same one she had when she cut my bangs off at age 7 and told Mom I wanted them short. A woman to my right started to laugh, but caught herself and coughed instead. My bridesmaids just stared. My mother turned away, whispering something to her sister. My father muttered under his breath. "Don't ruin this day by making it about you," he said. About me? I blinked, tasting iron at the back of my throat. The wine soaked deeper into the fabric, a crimson Rorschach blot blooming across my middle. Russell wasn't even in the room yet. No one stepped forward. No one took my hand. I looked at my mother. She was busy fixing a fold in Seraphine's dress. I looked at my father, His jaw clenched, eyes locked on the pulpit. No one saw me, not really, and I realized I wasn't going to be rescued, not from this, not from her, not ever. I turned away without a word. My shoes made hollow taps against the hardwood as I walked back down the hall, into the empty corridor behind the chapel, the smell of fresh flowers mixed with old wood and wine. I held the hem of my ruined dress above the floor, my knuckles white. It was happening again. She had made a mess of something sacred, again, and no one was going to stop her. I didn't storm out. That would have given her the satisfaction. Instead, I walked to the small restroom tucked near the side of the chapel hall. The light flickered, the faucet was loose, and the tile was cold beneath my heels. But it gave me enough space to breathe. My maid of honor, Jessica, followed close behind, whispering apologies that weren't hers to say. She dabbed at the wine with a club soda-soaked napkin, her hands shaking more than mine. I just stood there, arms raised like I was mid-arrest. She didn't mean to, I'm sure, she said. I didn't correct her, because I knew the truth, and I didn't have the energy to make someone else believe it. Not again. After about 10 minutes, I stepped back out into the reception. I passed the floral arch, the welcome board with Russell's name printed perfectly in gold. Mine was there too, just spelled wrong, still. No one had caught it. The guests had moved on, champagne glasses clinked, waiters carried in silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, and Seraphine? She was holding court near the cake table, laughing with 3 of our cousins like she hadn't just drenched my dress in Merlot. That's when the MC, a young guy in a blue suit too shiny for the room, tapped the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could get your attention for a moment, we're about to welcome our bride. People started clapping. Phones lifted. I straightened the front of my gown, lifted my chin, and took one step forward. And then, the cake collapsed. Not a full toppling, not some slapstick comedy mess, just the top layer. A delicate 4-tiered masterpiece Russell and I had chosen together, decorated with hand-swirled buttercream and sugar magnolias. The top tier tilted sideways and fell off completely, crashing to the floor in a thud, sending a few guests stumbling back. Gasps. A woman shrieked, then silence. I stood there, frozen again. Not because of the cake, but because I saw her, Seraphine, standing just beside the display, arms folded casually. Her face didn't flinch, but her hands had just dropped down from adjusting something underneath the table. A staff member jogged up. That's weird. We leveled it earlier this morning. It was perfectly balanced. Of course it was. I didn't say a word, just inhaled through my nose and turned away again. I was beginning to lose count of the number of moments that day I had to walk away from. The rest of the reception blurred for a bit. Small talk, wine refills, Russell trying to pull me back into the glow of the evening. I smiled for the photos. I smiled through the whispers. I smiled when my aunt said, "You look brave." Then came the speeches. Russell gave his first, strong, short, full of the right kind of gratitude and charm. People cheered. I was up next. The MC invited me to the mic. The lights softened. The room quieted. I stepped forward, finally ready to say something real. I cleared my throat. Thank you all for being here with me and Russell. And then the mic cut out. Dead silence. The lights flickered and music started to play. Too loud, too sudden. The MC scrambled. A staffer rushed to the control panel. Sorry, system glitch, someone said from the back. I glanced over. My cousin Joel, Seraphine's best friend growing up, stood near the soundboard, casually scrolling his phone. I stepped back from the mic and gave the crowd a small smile, then returned to my seat. Russell leaned over. What the hell was that? I shrugged. But inside, my stomach burned. This wasn't clumsy. This was rehearsed. These weren't isolated incidents. These were dominoes, lined up in secret, pushed one by one while everyone around me applauded the timing. I didn't want to believe it, but I'd seen this choreography before. My 8th birthday, when Seraphine opened my gift before I could, claiming it had her name on the tag. It didn't. Senior prom. My dress mysteriously torn down the side just hours before photos. Seraphine swore it must have been the dry cleaner. College. My scholarship essay vanished from my laptop 2 days before it was due. Weeks later, I found the draft in Seraphine's miscellaneous folder on the family computer. And every time I brought it up, I heard the same refrain. You're overreacting. She didn't mean it. You're just too sensitive. It wasn't just the things that happened. It was the way the people around us refused to look. As the reception carried on, I sat quietly at the main table, my plate untouched. The room felt louder, colder. Laughter echoed, none of it mine. At one point, Seraphine walked by and squeezed my shoulder. You doing okay, sis? I looked up, searching her face for something. Remorse, even fake concern. But all I saw was her favorite expression, practiced innocence. I forced a smile. Great, she winked. Good, you know I've got your back. Then she disappeared into the crowd, like a ghost slipping through the walls of a house she never stopped haunting. I glanced across the room at my parents. My father was deep in conversation with an old friend. My mother was arranging the centerpiece on her table as if it were more important than anything I might be feeling. And then it hit me, this wedding, this entire day, it wasn't mine, it was a set, and I'd been cast as an extra redefine. I whispered under my breath, a mantra I hadn't known I needed. If I don't stop this now, I'll disappear completely. And maybe I already had. And I started remembering everything they worked so hard to erase. It came back not all at once, but like a string of beads slipping through my fingers. Smooth, fast, undeniable. The ceremony had ended hours earlier, though it hardly felt like it belonged to me. The sun was settling behind the moss-draped oaks outside the reception tent, casting long shadows on the lawn. People lingered with half-empty glasses, politely buzzing around the cocktail tables. I needed air, space, something that didn't smell like roses and family expectations. I walked a loop around the edge of the yard, pretending to be on a call so no one would stop me. When I finally made my way back, one of my mother's friends, Diane, waved me down with a soft smile. In her hand, she held a square of ivory linen, neatly folded and tied with a pale blue ribbon. Your mom said to give you this, she said. Said it's something old, something sentimental. I nodded and accepted it, holding the soft bundle like it might hum in my hands. Inside the tent, the crowd was starting to gather near the dinner tables. Soft jazz played overhead. As I sat down to unwrap the gift, I imagined maybe it was one of my grandmother's old handkerchiefs. Maybe they'd stitched my initials on it, AD, something real, something mine. But as I untied the ribbon and unfolded the cloth, my chest went still. Monogrammed across one corner, in elaborate gold thread, were the letters, SD, Seraphine Delacroix, my sister's initials. I stared at it, blinking, turning it over, hoping maybe it was just a shared cloth or a mistake. But there was no second layer, no hidden embroidery. Just those letters, staring back at me, stitched in confidence. Across the room, my mother noticed me holding it. She smiled faintly and waved a hand like she'd forgotten it was even in play. Oh well, she said, walking past. It's all in the family, no one will know the difference. I wanted to ask her, how do you keep making the same mistake and still call it love? But I didn't say a word, because I knew what she'd say. She'd brush it off, the same way she did when Seraphine wrecked my bike and blamed it on the neighbor's kid, or when she took my college acceptance letter off the fridge and replaced it with Seraphine's graduation party invite. None of this was new. It just hurt more today because I was supposed to be the bride. I slid the cloth into my clutch without folding it. Dinner was being called inside. I followed the crowd through the side flap of the tent and into the reception hall, where the screen above the stage began to flicker with a slideshow titled, The Delacroix Girls, Through the Years. The first few slides came on in sequence, baby Seraphine in a sailor dress, toddler Seraphine winning a ribbon at the county fair, Seraphine on stage as Clara in the Nutcracker. More photos came, her school play, high school graduation, college sorority, the bridal shower. I waited. The first photo of me appeared 10 minutes in. I was a baby in the corner of a photo where Seraphine was blowing out candles. A minute later, there I was again, maybe 6 years old, standing in the background at one of her spelling bees, holding a juice box. The third photo, the last one, was blurry. My face half turned, mid-laugh, in the edge of a family Christmas portrait. A woman near me leaned over and whispered, "Wasn't that you on the swing just now?" I nodded, smiling like I was grateful for her noticing. "Maybe the files got lost," someone else said gently. "Technology's funny sometimes." I didn't answer, because the truth was clearer than the screen above me. They didn't forget me. They just never remembered. As the guests clapped politely at the final frame, Seraphine in her college cap and gown, I walked to the back of the room where the bar was quieter. I needed a refill, something to hold, something to keep my hands from shaking. I thought about a moment, maybe 12 years ago, when I'd come home for Christmas during my last year of nursing school. I asked my mother why there were no baby pictures of me in the living room. She didn't even pause. She laughed. "You were just less camera ready," she said, sipping her tea. It wasn't malicious, just dismissive. Like most things were in that house. My victories were always minor, easily missed, easily rewritten. I'd win a local art competition, and Seraphine would borrow my ribbon for a party prop. I'd save money from babysitting to buy school supplies, and somehow she'd need it for emergencies. One year, I bought a sketchbook with hard-bound edges and thick paper. I labeled it in sharp pen, "Property of Aurelia, do not touch." Weeks later, it disappeared. When I found it in Seraphine's room, she'd torn out the first few pages and filled it with her own poems. When I confronted her, she looked me in the eye and said, "You weren't using it." That's always how it went. Anything that was mine, if unattended, even for a moment, became hers by default. And if I pushed back, I was too sensitive, holding a grudge, ruining the mood. Back then, I learned not to hold things too tightly, not gifts, not words, not even moments, because anything worth remembering would eventually be repackaged and handed to Seraphine as if it belonged to her all along. Now, watching guests pass by, smiling, I realized something bitter and sharp. If I didn't exist in their memories, then I didn't owe them mine. That single thought steadied me. I walked into the bathroom down the hallway, far from the noise and clinking glasses, locked the door behind me. The lights hummed overhead, soft and warm. I stared into the mirror, not at the dress, not at the smear of mascara still hiding in the corner of my eye, but at the woman standing in front of it. I wasn't invisible. They had just decided she was easier to manage if she believed she was. And now, I was done letting them choose what parts of me were worth remembering. And then she gave me the perfect excuse to finally speak. The air inside the reception hall had grown heavier, not because of the weather, but because of the weight I carried in my chest. As more guests funneled in, I slipped back into the crowd, adjusting the angle of my dress to keep the wine stain from catching the light. Jessica, my bridesmaid, had managed to lessen the damage with club soda, but the color still clung like a bruise across my torso. The scent of roasted chicken and garden roses filled the room, but my stomach twisted. I wasn't hungry. I just wanted the night to end with minimal bloodshed. But Seraphine had other plans. A ripple of hushed conversations stirred around one of the back tables. I noticed people passing phones, smirking, and tilting screens toward each other. Jessica turned to me, her expression tight. "You should see this." She held up her phone. Seraphine's latest Instagram story was playing. It was a filtered photo of the two of us standing shoulder to shoulder earlier in the evening, before the spill. From a flattering angle, our dresses nearly identical in silhouette, our faces similar enough for people who didn't know better to confuse us. The caption read, "Two brides, or two sisters who could be. Hashtag stealing the spotlight, had family first." My throat went dry. The comments rolled in like predictable punches. "You both look stunning. OMG, can't even tell who's the bride. Twins!" She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't playfulness, it was positioning. And once again, she had made herself the main character of my life event. I glanced at the dance floor. She was spinning in slow circles with our cousin Joel, beaming, soaking in the attention. Not one person had called her out. Not my parents, not Russell's family. Not even the bridesmaids who claimed to have my back. My chest burned with a familiar heat, one I had buried for years beneath logic and loyalty. It wasn't just the post, it was the way people kept enabling it. 10 minutes later, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mr. Langston, one of my father's oldest friends, the kind of man who wore handkerchiefs and drank scotch like it was his second job. He looked at me kindly, then turned to Russell. "Well, congratulations to you both," he said, looking between Seraphine and Russell. "You make such a lovely couple." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Russell opened his mouth to correct him, but Seraphine beat him to it, with a laugh. "Oh, thank you. We're just that close," she said, nudging Russell's arm in mock playfulness. He didn't laugh. He looked down at me, quietly. I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't ask her to clarify. I just walked away. Not because I was too hurt, but because I was done giving her the stage. I made my way toward the back terrace, the sliding glass doors creaking slightly as I pushed them open. The cool air hit my skin, grounding me. It was only then that I let myself feel the full weight of it. I'd spent my entire life trying not to upset the balance. I let things slide. I made excuses for her, for the dress she borrowed and stained, for the boyfriend she flirted with as a joke, for the stories she twisted to make herself look better at my expense. "She's just more expressive," Mom always said. "She doesn't mean it," Dad would add. "Don't be so sensitive, Leah," Seraphine would smirk. And for years, I believed them, because being the quiet one seemed safer than being the angry one. But now, watching the people inside continue to orbit around her like they had since we were kids, I realized something sharp and undeniable. I wasn't keeping peace all those years. I was keeping quiet, and they loved me quiet. Quiet didn't confront. Quiet didn't correct. Quiet made their lives easier. I wasn't quiet because I was graceful. I was quiet because I was trained. I ran my fingers along the edge of the railing, cold metal grounding me further. Inside, the music changed. It was one of Russell's picks, a classic Motown track we'd both loved during our road trip through Alabama. The memory made me smile. Just a little. Footsteps approached. I turned, half expecting Jessica, but it was Russell. He slid next to me, one hand slipping into his pocket. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head. "I will be." He didn't push. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He knew when I needed words and when I didn't. After a pause, I said, "If she keeps doing this, I'll have to say something." Russell looked out at the moonlight with me. "And once I do, I won't stop." He glanced at me. "Say it. I'll be here when you do." It was simple, but it mattered. The conversation ended there, not because there was nothing left to say, but because we understood each other. And then, Seraphine gave me the perfect excuse to finally speak, and the next move she made proved I was right to warn her. It happened not even half an hour later. I was trying to catch my breath, standing near the drink station, just past the dessert table. The crowd had shifted toward the dining area, and for a brief second, the room felt still again, like maybe, just maybe, I could reclaim a bit of the day. That's when I heard the soft buzz of murmuring near the far wall. Someone said, "Is that real?" Another voice. "She posted it to the live wall. So yeah." I walked over slowly, already bracing myself. At the corner of the reception space, our venue had set up an interactive photo wall. Real-time uploads from guests streamed across a wide screen above the gift table. Cute, clever, meant for laughs and love. What stared back at me wasn't love, and it definitely wasn't cute. It was a high-resolution photo of me and Seraphine taken shortly after the red wine incident. We were standing side by side, smiling in that forced, too-tired way you do when there's a camera and family around. I remembered the moment because I didn't want to be in the photo. Seraphine had insisted, grabbed my wrist, pulled me in. What made the photo worse was the edit. Someone had adjusted the brightness and contrast, just enough to make the stain on my dress practically glow. The crimson soaked through the bodice, creeping downward like a spreading wound. My face, already pale, looked nearly translucent. Underneath the image was a caption, "True love always shows up in red and white." The post had been submitted by Joel, Seraphine's cousin. Of course it was. I stood there staring at it, wondering if anyone else saw it for what it really was. A joke at my expense, a spotlight handed to her again. A way to remind everyone that no matter what this day was supposed to be, it would still orbit her. I turned away before anyone could comment on my reaction. Before someone offered a pitying smile, or worse, another excuse for her. It was then I saw a familiar figure seated at the corner of the bar. He was alone, hunched slightly over a glass of scotch, looking down at the countertop like it held answers. For a second, I thought I was imagining him, but then he looked up, and I knew. Noah. Of all people. I hadn't seen him in nearly 10 years, not since the fallout. Not since I found out that Seraphine had been texting him behind my back for months. She called it advice at the time. I called it betrayal. So did he, eventually. We had never spoken after that. I walked toward him, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand, to confirm. He saw me coming and stood up halfway, awkwardly tucking his napkin under the edge of his drink. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Hey," I returned. "What are you doing here?" Noah scratched his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "Seraphine sent me an invite. Said it would mean something if I showed up. I figured, I don't know, maybe it'd be a nice surprise, a peace offering." I stared at him. "You thought crashing my wedding after what happened between us would be a nice surprise?" "I didn't think of it like that. I mean, she said you'd want to see me." "She lied," I said flatly. He nodded, looking properly ashamed. Yeah, she does that, huh?" That part almost made me laugh. "Enjoy the drinks," I said, then turned on my heel and walked away. I headed straight for the bridal suite. Seraphine was there, sitting at the makeup table, applying a fresh coat of gloss, like nothing had happened, like she wasn't slowly erasing me from my own wedding, again. She looked up at my reflection in the mirror and smirked. "You look tired," she said. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. "You knew exactly what you were doing with that photo," I said. "And Noah, that wasn't an accident." She didn't even blink. "You always take things so personally, Leah. It's not that deep." "Right," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "Then why do you spend so much energy making me feel small?" Seraphine capped her gloss and turned to face me directly. "You've always been the dramatic one, not me." "No," I said. "You're the dramatic one. I'm the one who cleaned up after it." She crossed her arms. "I just thought it'd be nice to reconnect with people. Get some attention off your dress, lighten the mood." I laughed once, short and sharp. "You think publicly humiliating me, inviting someone you knew would hit a nerve, and mocking my ruined gown was lightening the mood?" She shrugged. "People are enjoying themselves. That's all that matters." "Not to me," I said. Silence stretched between us. "Do you know what today was supposed to be?" I asked finally. "It was supposed to be the one day that wasn't about you." "God," she muttered, rolling her eyes. "You are exhausting." "No," I corrected, stepping closer. "I'm done being exhausted by you." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there, letting her see that I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. "You keep playing games," I said, my voice low but steady. "But you're going to learn. I don't stay silent anymore." She smirked again, but it didn't reach her eyes. I could see the crack starting to form. I left before she could reply. Back out in the reception hall, the crowd was shifting toward the cake table again. Servers had cleaned up the earlier mess. Russell caught my eye from across the room. I gave him a small nod. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The tide had turned, and I was finally standing still, not swimming upstream anymore. But she didn't bow out. She doubled down. The reception was beginning to taper. Speeches had been delivered, dinner was winding down, and most guests had settled into that comfortable lull of full stomachs and half-finished drinks. The sky outside had slipped into a navy dusk, string lights casting a warm glow across the patio. Inside the hall, servers moved quietly between tables, offering coffee and plated desserts. I had just sat back down with Russell when Seraphine approached our table with a pastel gift bag in her hand. Her smile was too wide, too sweet, like a performer at curtain call who knew she'd stolen the show. "This is for you," she said, handing it to me like it was some kind of holy relic. "A little something for your future. A reminder, you know, of where love can go if you're not careful." She winked. I paused, confused, but took it. Inside the bag was a clear plastic garment sleeve. Folded inside, carefully, almost reverently, was Seraphine's old wedding dress. Yellowed, wrinkled, still stained near the hem. I stared at it, unsure what reaction she was aiming for. The dress was infamous in our family. She had worn it during her whirlwind marriage to a man who cheated before their one-year anniversary. She'd cried for weeks, told anyone who'd listen she'd burned everything that reminded her of that day. So why now? Why gift this? I looked up. Seraphine was still smiling, like she'd done something generous, almost noble. Before I could speak, my mother appeared behind her. She touched my shoulder gently and said, "Seraphine's just sentimental. Try to see the good in it." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because in that moment, all I could think was, I've spent my entire life trying to see the good in cruelty dressed in silk. The dress wasn't a keepsake. It was a warning. And if I had accepted it the way she wanted me to, graciously, silently, it would have been her victory. But I didn't flinch. I simply folded the plastic back over the gown, placed it on an empty chair next to me, and returned to my coffee. Let them watch. About an hour later, as guests began filtering outside for cigars and fresh air, a young man with a shoulder-rig camera motioned toward me. "Miss Delacroix?" I stood. "Yes?" He approached quietly, his voice low. "I've been reviewing the footage to sync up camera angles for the highlight reel. I thought you might want to see this before it gets edited out." He handed me his tablet and pressed play. The screen showed a split shot, one wide, one close. The wide view displayed the cake table, elegant and perfectly centered in the reception space. The close-up was focused on the base of the table. As the MC announced, "Let's welcome our beautiful bride." Seraphine stepped close to the table under the guise of fixing a napkin on the edge, and then, deliberately, she used the side of her foot to nudge the table's front leg, just enough to unbalance it. Seconds later, the top tier slid and fell. The moment I had dismissed as a weird accident was, in fact, planned, executed with quiet precision. I handed the tablet back without blinking. "Could you send that clip to me?" I asked. "Of course." I thanked him, took a deep breath, and walked toward the planner's station near the DJ booth. I requested copies of all media files from the event, photos, videos, uploads, stating it was for documentation purposes. The planner didn't question me. Back in the bridal suite, I sat down alone with my laptop. One by one, I gathered everything. A screenshot of the wine-stained dress on the big screen, the Instagram caption about red and white love, a photo of Seraphine handing me her wedding dress with that too genuine smile, and now, the video, her foot shifting the table, her glance toward the MC. I printed out the clearest still frame, the one where her hand brushed the tablecloth while her leg did the rest. Then, I opened my email. The subject line, documentation regarding wedding day events. I wrote, "Dear Mom and Dad, I've attached documentation of several incidents from the reception, each one clearly initiated or orchestrated by Seraphine. I am not asking you to pick sides. I am asking for clarity. If you support this behavior, I need to know. Your daughter Aurelia." I attached the photos and the video, hit send, and closed the laptop. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was just done. An hour later, I found Seraphine in one of the back lounges, scrolling her phone with a flute of champagne in hand. She looked up when I entered, her face tightening just slightly when she saw me alone. "Back for more drama?" she asked. I didn't respond. I simply pulled the folded photo from my purse and placed it on the coffee table between us. She glanced down. It was the still image, her foot at the base of the table leg, her eyes darting toward the MC. Her expression froze. "I don't know what that's supposed to mean," she muttered, defensive now. I sat across from her, calmly. "It means the performance is over." "Don't start with this," she said, rolling her eyes. "You always twist everything." I raised an eyebrow. "If it's not that deep, like you keep saying, then why do you spend so much time setting the stage?" She didn't answer. I stood up. "You wanted a spotlight. I said. Now you've got it, but I'm walking off your stage. As I turned to leave, she said nothing. No apology, no denial, just silence. But this time, it wasn't mine. By the next morning, the reception hall had been cleared, flowers bundled in vases for guests to take, and the air of celebration replaced with the muted quiet of hotel breakfasts. Most of the wedding party and out-of-town relatives were still staying at the same resort. I'd hoped for a few hours of peace before we said our goodbyes. Instead, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was just the usual. Thank you messages, tagged photos, maybe a few leftover notifications from the night before. But when I unlocked the screen, a different kind of chaos unfolded. The group chat labeled Wedding Coordination had blown up. Not the vendors group, but the private one. Bridal party, family, and a few people who were helping. I'd been added to it at the start of planning, but muted it weeks ago to preserve my sanity. Now someone had posted a screenshot. Not just a snippet, an entire set of messages from the days leading up to the wedding. At the top of the list was Seraphine's name. Her words read like stage directions. Make sure the wine is poured at the entry moment. Cake toppling cue equals bridal name drop. Limit mic to 2 min, then roll music. I scrolled down, reading them twice, 3 times, not because I didn't understand, but because the brazenness of it was almost absurd. It wasn't sabotage hidden in subtle suggestions. It was an actual playbook. Undeniable. I sat up in bed, my feet finding the carpet, phone still in hand. Russell stirred beside me, glancing over with sleepy confusion. What is it? I turned the screen toward him. His jaw tensed immediately. Who sent this? Looks like someone posted it by mistake. Maybe they meant to send it privately. But it's here now. For a long second, we didn't speak. Then I opened my photo gallery, pulled up the footage from the videographer, the stills from the dress stain, the Instagram posts. I attached them all to a new message addressed to my parents. No commentary, just the evidence. At the bottom, I typed, I need to know what your silence means now. It took less than 10 minutes for my phone to buzz again. From Dad. She didn't mean harm. She was under stress. The final nail. They had been in the room. They'd seen the way it unfolded. And still, this was the hill they chose to die on, defending her. I didn't reply. By midday, the so-called farewell brunch had begun in the hotel's garden room. Long tables lined with fruit platters, pastries, and trays of eggs. Guests wandered between conversation clusters, sipping mimosas, trading small talk about travel plans. I was standing near the doorway, speaking to one of Russell's cousins, when the other cousin, Mark, cleared his throat at the center of the room. Mark was a retired Army officer, a man whose voice naturally carried authority. The chatter around us quieted almost instantly. If I could have everyone's attention, he began. His tone was polite but firm, the kind that didn't invite interruption. This weekend was meant to celebrate love, but I've watched someone turn it into a stage for cruelty. Enough. There was a ripple of discomfort through the crowd. I saw Seraphine look up from her seat near the center table, her expression hardening. Mark held up his phone. This was leaked to the wedding coordination chat this morning. He read Seraphine's instructions aloud. Every line. The wine, the cake, the mic. Gasps scattered through the room. A few heads turned sharply toward her. Others looked at me. Seraphine let out a short laugh, the brittle kind meant to smooth over awkwardness. You're seriously taking that out of context, she said, her voice rising just slightly. It was a joke. But her voice faltered when no one laughed along. She tried again, softer this time. I think we're all just tired. Emotions are high. Then her eyes welled up. The tears came right on cue. This is being blown way out of proportion. I didn't move. I didn't step forward or tell her to stop. I didn't comfort her either. I let the truth work on its own. Mark glanced in my direction, then put his phone away. We all saw it. That's all there is to say. The brunch resumed, but the air had shifted. Conversations were quieter. Eyes lingered longer on me than on her. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. By late afternoon, the social fallout was already tangible. Seraphine's Instagram, normally a steady stream of curated smiles and flattering angles, had gone quiet. The last post, our two brides photo, was filled with comments that weren't the usual praise. "You owe her an apology." "This is low." "Shame on you." A wedding blog that had been in talks to feature the event pulled out entirely, citing misalignment with brand values. I hadn't even known they'd pitched my wedding. Meanwhile, a candid shot of me, standing in the reception hall with my hands folded, wearing the wine-stained dress, circulated quietly among friends. No captions, no hashtags, just the image, and people seemed to understand the weight of it without explanation. That night, I sat alone by the poolside lounge, the surface of the water shimmering under the muted glow of string lights. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of the gardenias planted along the fence. My phone buzzed again. A message from Dad. "We hope you'll let this go for the family's sake." I stared at the words for a long moment. The old me would have tried to find a compromise, tried to see their side, tried to absorb the hurt so no one else had to. Not this time. I typed back, "This time, I'm choosing myself." Then I opened the group thread and deleted it entirely from my phone. The silence that followed was cleaner than any apology could have been. Peace doesn't always feel good at first, it just feels quiet. After I closed the door on Seraphine that night, the silence in my house felt different. It wasn't empty, it was earned. And somehow, that made all the difference. The next morning, I woke up to a soft gray light filtering through the kitchen blinds. The scent of brewed coffee filled the air, and for the first time in days, my shoulders didn't feel like armor. I folded the last of the laundry I'd left untouched after the wedding. Russell's shirts, a set of guest towels still carrying the smell of lavender softener. It felt simple, ordinary, and yet, under that simplicity was a new kind of clarity. I was no longer waiting for someone to tell me I was right. I didn't need permission to feel what I felt. What Seraphine had done wasn't some abstract emotional mess. It was a campaign, and it ended at my front door last night. When I picked up the mail later that day, there was a large manila envelope among the usual stack of grocery store flyers and real estate postcards. The return address read, Delacroix Residence. No first names. Inside was a printed letter, 3 pages, single-spaced, signed by both of my parents. The font was Times New Roman, classic, formal, cold. They wrote, "We're disappointed that you made the wedding about drama. Seraphine has always struggled emotionally. You know that. As the more grounded one, we expected you to lead with grace. You need to be the bigger person." They never mentioned the video footage, or the photos, or the group chat messages. Not one word about the sabotage. They didn't ask how I was doing, didn't acknowledge the years I'd silently paid their bills, helped Seraphine through her divorce, or watched Ruby while Seraphine went on business retreats that mysteriously never involved a hotel receipt. They just wanted me to reach out, to fix it. And then for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to. Instead, I placed the letter neatly back in the envelope, sealed it with a strip of tape, and wrote across the front in black ink, "Return to sender." I set it on the counter. It would go out with the next batch of mail. Then I opened my banking app. The auto transfer to my mother's account had gone through like clockwork every second Friday for 7 years. That line of quiet assistance had never been acknowledged beyond the occasional, "Thanks, baby, you're such a helper." I canceled the transfer. I logged into the tuition account connected to Ruby's private school. Seraphine had listed me as the emergency billing contact, the fallback, just in case. I removed myself entirely. I sent a short, direct email to the hospital billing office where my father still had lingering expenses from his stroke recovery. I was no longer the guarantor, his name only, his responsibility. It wasn't spite, it was sobriety. It was me saying, "If you won't protect me, I won't fund the narrative." That night, the house was quiet again. Russell had gone out to meet a friend for dinner. I sat by the window with a book I couldn't finish, watching the porch light flicker slightly in the wind. The street outside was calm, our neighborhood settled into the kind of hush only found in tucked-away suburbs. At 10:31 p.m., someone knocked on the door. I hesitated, not because I didn't know who it was, but because I did. I stood slowly, walked to the front, and peeked through the peephole. Seraphine. No makeup, no carefully curated expression. Her hoodie hung loose over her frame, and standing beside her was Ruby, clutching a stuffed bear and blinking sleepily. I opened the door halfway. The screen door stayed latched. Seraphine didn't say anything right away. Her eyes were glassy, but not tearful. Her lips were chapped. "Just a few nights," she said. "We have nowhere else to go." I looked at Ruby. She was barefoot, shifting her weight from one leg to the other. She didn't look scared. She looked confused, maybe tired, maybe used to this. My heart ached. But I didn't step aside. I opened the screen door just enough to kneel down and meet Ruby's eye level. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I love you more than you know. I always will. But I can't let my door be a revolving door for pain." She didn't speak, just nodded once, like she understood more than a child should. I stood up and turned to Seraphine. "I warned you, and I meant it." She opened her mouth like she might protest, but nothing came out. There was no blow-up, no last-ditch guilt trip, just a tired woman with too many excuses and not enough places left to run. I closed the door, not in anger, not even with regret. I locked it, turned off the porch light, and walked back to the living room. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. A text from my father. "We're hearing you turned your sister away. Please reconsider. Family is family." I didn't answer. Because sometimes, family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when the blood turns cold. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and turned on the TV. Not to watch, but to fill the room with something other than memory. Peace, I was learning, doesn't always feel like relief at first. Sometimes it feels like silence. And silence, I decided, wasn't something to fear anymore. The silence no longer scared me. Because this time, it was mine. It had been a month since the wedding. The kind of month that feels both short and long at the same time. The kind where you mark progress not by days, but by breaths. Each one a little less heavy than the last. That morning I woke early, just after the sky had gone from ink blue to soft gray. The porch still held the coolness of night, and the wooden planks beneath my feet creaked as I stepped out barefoot, mug of coffee warming my hands. I sat down in the same old chair I'd sat in 100 times before, after long shifts, during sleepless nights, when Russell and I argued about bills or plans or nothing at all. But this morning, the silence didn't press on me the way it used to. It felt like space, room. I was still in my robe when I heard the mail carrier's truck putter by. He placed a few envelopes into the box and gave a quick wave through the fence. I waved back absently and waited until the engine had faded before walking down the short path to collect it. Among the usual junk mail and utility statements was a single white envelope, handwritten in elegant script. Aurelia. The return address read, M. Delacroix. My Aunt Maribel. Back on the porch, I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the note. Inside were no grand declarations, just a soft message, one I read twice to let it sink in. You weren't invisible. They just didn't look. Folded behind the note was a small stack of photographs, actual printed photos, the kind you have to hold with both hands, the kind that smell faintly of ink and dust. The first one showed me at 7 years old, barefoot in the backyard, a paintbrush in one hand, and my tongue poking out in focus. Bright orange streaked across a canvas propped on a stool. In the background, Seraphine stood with arms crossed, clearly unimpressed. The second was me cradling my first goldfish, a toothy grin stretched across my face, front tooth missing. Dad's arms reached in from the edge, gently guiding mine. The third nearly took my breath away. My 13th birthday, pink streamers sagging across the ceiling, a cake topped with uneven candles, and me in the center, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with delight. A photo from a celebration they told me never happened, a birthday I supposedly asked to skip because I hated being fussed over. I blinked hard, lips pressed together. And for years they told me I was the forgettable one, the background, the quiet support beam. But here was proof, tangible, delicate, that I had always been there, full of light, worth remembering. I set the photos down gently, letting the breeze shift them slightly across the table. A mockingbird chirped from the oak tree nearby. Across the street, a neighbor opened their blinds and began their own morning rituals. Russell came out a little later, still in pajama pants, his hair askew. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me and took my free hand. We sat there for a while, letting the stillness do its work. Then he stood, disappeared into the house, and returned with a canvas, blank and waiting. Alongside it, a small tin of paints. "I figured," he said softly, "if anyone's going to paint your story now, it ought to be you." I smiled without forcing it. "I think I'll paint myself this time," I said. And I meant it, because I wasn't trying to rewrite the past anymore. I wasn't chasing apologies or fixing broken versions of me that only existed in other people's narratives. Seraphine had become persona non grata in our circle. Her name dropped from guest lists. Sponsors and brands she'd worked with quietly stepped away. Messages poured into her social media, some cruel, some simply disappointed. A wedding blog that had once asked for a feature emailed to say they'd withdrawn the offer. But none of that gave me satisfaction, not because I forgave her, but because vindication and peace don't always live in the same house. She had built her identity on being the star. But when the lights went out and no one applauded, she was left with silence she couldn't tolerate. As for my parents, there were no more letters, no calls. And strangely, that too felt like peace. They had chosen a version of the story that made sense to them, even if it meant casting me as difficult, cold, or overreactive. I didn't need to audition for their approval anymore. The family I was building now, quiet, intentional, and honest, didn't require me to shrink. I was still grieving pieces of what could have been. That never goes away entirely. I would probably always flinch a little at family holidays, at the sound of my father's voice on a voicemail, at the idea that Seraphine might one day spin the story back to sympathy. But healing, I was learning, wasn't about erasing the ache. It was about holding it, gently, and choosing not to pass it forward. Later that afternoon, I placed the photos from Maribel in a small wooden box, not to hide them, but to keep them safe. Not everything deserved to be burned. Some memories, even painful ones, deserved to be preserved, not for anyone else, but for me. To remind myself that I was always whole, even when no one noticed. I stepped out onto the back porch again just before dusk. The sky had turned from soft blue to deep amber. The air carried that first whisper of autumn, and somewhere, a neighbor's wind chimes sang softly in the breeze. I laid the blank canvas across the table, opened the first paint tin, and pressed the brush to its surface. The silence no longer scared me, because this time, it was mine. Sometimes, the hardest part of healing isn't walking away, it's choosing not to walk back. This story isn't just about a ruined wedding dress or a toxic sibling. It's about learning to protect your peace, even when it means disappointing the people who raised you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own family to finally feel free? If this story moved you, share your experience in the comments. We're listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories just like this one.